specifically in this particular case, I think the Supreme Court failed in its duties. It failed to uphold its constitution, which it is expected to protect.
Okay, I'm just repeating that because I think it's very important. In this case, the Supreme Court failed in its duties. It failed to uphold the Constitution, which is what it is there to do.
Yes, I have no doubt about that.
Hello and welcome to a special interview for The Wire. It's almost 6 years since Jammu and Kashmir was reduced from a full-fledged state to a union territory. In fact, for almost as long, the Modi government has been promising to restore statehood. And 20 months have passed since the Supreme Court said statehood should be restored as soon as possible. But that hasn't happened, and no one knows when it will. Now, an organization called the Forum for Human Rights in Jammu and Kashmir has petitioned MPs to seek immediate and full restoration of statehood during the monsoon session of Parliament, which began yesterday. What are the chances that could happen? What would it mean for the people of the Union Territory if it doesn't? And meanwhile, where does that leave the Omar Abdullah government? Those are the issues I shall raise today with former Home Secretary and the co-chairman of the Forum for Human Rights in Jammu and Kashmir, Gopal Pillai. Mr. Pillai, your organization, the Forum for Human Rights in Jammu and Kashmir, has petitioned MPs for the immediate and full restoration of statehood in Jammu and Kashmir in the upcoming monsoon session of Parliament. Clearly, this is not what the Modi government plans to do. So can I start by asking, why do you believe the immediate and full restoration of statehood is necessary?
Karan, before I start, I'd just like to make one point, that this whole issue of the restoration of statehood has actually come about because of the abdication by the Supreme Court of its duties. You would be aware that petitions were filed challenging the constitutionality of that order. The Supreme Court, instead of taking a decision, said we are not going into that issue. And to give you a very simple analogy, if it had happened in a bureaucratic this thing, we would have faced disciplinary action for not having acted on a complaint or on a grievance redressal. Another analogy would be that if I had a theft in my house, and I complain to the police says, we have found the thief who's got your goods, but he says he will return the goods in due course, and therefore we are not taking any further action. This is exactly the situation in which we have come. We would have liked the Supreme Court to have said, is the action of abolishing a state constitutional or not constitutional? Either way, if it was constitutional, then there's no issue of what we would be discussing today. If they had said it's not constitutional, then the state would have been restored immediately. And again, we would not have been discussing this issue today. I just thought I'd just put that into background and then say...
Let me intervene at that point, because I think what you're saying about the Supreme Court is worth pursuing for a moment before I go back to my original question. Although the Supreme Court did not rule on the constitutionality or unconstitutionality of demoting an existing state to a union territory, your organization, the Forum for Human Rights in Jammu and Kashmir, believes that this has contravened the basic structure of the constitution, which views India as a union of states. So why don't you at this point explain to me, Mr. Pillai, why you believe demoting Jammu and Kashmir from statehood to a union territory was unconstitutional?
It's unconstitutional because, as you mentioned, India is a union of states. If the federal government has the power to abolish states, you could have a situation at one point where a central government having even a simple majority or a 2/3 majority is able to, shall I say, declare president's rule in state after state and make the entire state, entire country into different union territories and have a unitary form of government. And that we feel is something which is against the basic structure of the Constitution, on which the Supreme Court has ruled that you cannot do that.
So your fear is if you permit it to happen and claim it's constitutional in the case of Jammu and Kashmir, it can happen in the case of any other state in the country, and that would change the very character of India. That's your fear.
That is it. And in fact, this particular decision of the central government, even though it's a little aside, the Naga peace talks have actually gone into a dead end purely because of this one action of the central government, where they said that you can abolish a state. Because the negotiations with the government of India, with the NSCNIM and the interlocutor have all had, was shared sovereignty. And the shared sovereignty between state and center was the foundation on which the Naga talks were held and almost came to a, shall I say, a successful conclusion. And that foundation has been broken by this particular decision of the central government.
So we already have one repercussion, if I can so call it, of the impact of demoting Jammu and Kashmir. It's begun to adversely affect the Naga peace talks because the Nagas are terribly worried the same thing could happen to them. Isn't that right?
Yes.
Let's then come back to my original question. Why do you believe immediate and full restoration of statehood is necessary? Why immediate to begin with?
See, you had 6 years for the central government to set whatever they wanted to set in order, about the law and order, the governance, development, and so on. So having done that, having had now elections there, having by and large, shall I say, overall, a peaceful situation in Jammu and Kashmir, leave apart the one incident of the Pahalgam terrorist incident, which of course, the central government itself, the Lieutenant Governor has said it is a security lapse, and the security lapse is of the central government, not the state government or the Union Territory administration. So you need, in a democratic framework, you need arms of the democracy to work. If that democratic framework doesn't function and it becomes a, shall I say, an autocratic, somebody who is not accountable to the people, calling all the shots, then you have a problem. And that problem will not be solved by continuing the present system.
In other words, you're saying 6 years as a union territory is long enough to have addressed all the issues that the government had, be they of governance or terror. Now it's time to restore full statehood.
I fully agree with that, because that is absolutely essential, because then people will feel a sort of, what shall I say, a commitment towards their own government. Otherwise, that sense of alienation will not go away. We keep talking of winning hearts and minds, but you cannot win hearts and minds by having an administration which is far away from the people.
Let me at this point put to you what could be the likely responses of the Modi government. First, they will say that they assured the Supreme Court that statehood will be restored at an appropriate time, but that time hasn't come. And even though the Supreme Court asked for restoration as soon as possible, it's only 20 months since that was said, and that's not a very long time. In other words, it's not the appropriate time as yet. We need to wait a little longer, and it's only 20 months since the Supreme Court wanted immediate restoration, and 20 months is not a very long time.
You see, when the issue of elections to the Union Territory came, the central government said, we will hold elections at the appropriate time. And in that case, the Supreme Court said, you shall hold elections by a particular date. And elections were held by that particular date, and the heavens didn't fall. So, leaving it just to the central government, because if you are holding power, you don't want to relinquish that power. No Lieutenant Governor or the central government holding power in Jammu and Kashmir would like to relinquish that power. And therefore, you will hold it on as long as you can. And it can be as soon as possible, can be extended for another 5 years, it can be another 10 years, it can be another 20 years. And you could, as I said, you can maybe, when there's so much of pressure, they might say, okay, we'll restore statehood, and then you'll restore statehood in the sense that it will be a limited statehood with powers again, like you saw it in Jammu and Kashmir, in Delhi, where you will have powers with the LG of law and order, land, and the powers of posting and transfers, and then the rest of the powers with the government, which creates greater problems.
Let me put a second concern that the Modi government might have, and this time it's to do with terror. They could argue that terror remains a serious concern and therefore it's not time to restore full statehood. And to illustrate their point, they would point not just to Pahalgam, but to the small incidents that have been happening both before and after Pahalgam, including the one in Kishtwar this weekend. How do you respond to the claim that the terror situation doesn't permit the restoration of statehood?
Terror, it is nothing new as far as Kashmir or many parts of the northeast and even in parts of the left-wing extremist states. You've never abolished a state and said center must rule to pull out terror. So terror has been tackled even when you had a democratically elected full state government. I mean, I was Union Home Secretary at one time, and the level of terror had gone down to an extent, and you would be aware, at that time we were thinking in terms of, removing the Disturbed Areas Act and the Armed Forces Special Powers from selected districts of Jammu and Kashmir, where not even a single terrorist attack had happened for 5 years. I'm giving an example of Ganderbal district. In 2011, not one incident in that district for 5 years. And we said that it's a good sign that if people have been able to control that situation, give them the benefit of peace and the fact that they have cooperated fully, so that acts as an incentive to other districts also to become peaceful.
In other words, you're saying terror is not a blanket excuse to keep denying statehood.
Yes.
Okay. Thirdly, if I recall correctly, the Solicitor General told the Supreme Court that full statehood will be restored in stages. If that is what the government now seeks to do, would that be acceptable to you?
I don't think so. I think you're only prolonging the problem. You're not going to, you want to solve the situation. You want Jammu and Kashmir to develop. You want the people to cooperate fully with you. You cannot expect that people will cooperate fully with you if you deny them all the democratic means which is with them. It is their right. It is not something, no state should exist only because of the whims and fancies of the central government. I mean, states exist on their own right. I think that is the fundamental question. So it must be a very serious situation. And if you see the level of violence in Jammu and Kashmir compared to many other states, I think it's as good as or as bad as many other states. And you've not made them into union territories. You've not denied them the democratic functioning. Even when left-wing extremism, and he said it's the most serious internal security problem in India, as Dr. Manmohan Singh said, we never said, okay, let's abolish Chhattisgarh, let's abolish Orissa, let's abolish other states and run it from the center. You allowed the state governments to function and supported them from with your paramilitary forces and the army.
So your position is statehood must be restored immediately and secondly, fully. To do it in stages, to do it in part is simply not acceptable.
Yes, because you're only prolonging the situation. It's not going to improve situation. Why do you want to improve the situation, or you want only to be in power? It's as simple as that. If you want to be only in power, then you do whatever you want to do. Partly, you can have 5 stages before you get to full statehood in the next 40 years or so. Or you decide to give them full statehood. You still have, if you feel that a central state government is not functioning properly or is in the sense that you always use Article 356 if you want to get rid of it. I mean, it's happened in the past.
Okay. Let's then, at this point, Mr. Pillai, look at the situation that prevails in Jammu and Kashmir. Elections were held in September 24, and the National Conference won a huge majority. But Omar Abdullah, the Chief Minister, can't even pay his respects to martyrs on Martyrs' Day, something which has been the traditional practice of Jammu and Kashmir for decades. Does that make his position meaningless, or dare I say, farcical?
Yeah, his position is in one sense extremely difficult, let me put it that way. I mean, a situation where you can put a chief minister under house arrest, I think is no democracy. So you have to trust people. Once you had the elections, you have to trust the people, you have to trust the government. If you still feel you can give them 3 months, give them 6 months, and then you find that there's nothing which prevents the government of India from again taking action under Article 356.
You spoke specifically about the act of putting the chief minister under house arrest so that he couldn't go and pay his respects to martyrs on Martyrs' Day. Doesn't that give the lie away that this is clearly not a full-fledged federal democracy? If the chief minister can be put under house arrest merely because he wants to pay his respects to martyrs, something that's done peacefully, quietly, and almost unobtrusively, then it's pretty close to a joke, the situation.
Yes, because I think you are unnecessarily, shall I say, showing that you are very insecure. I mean, a simple act like Mirwais going to the Jama Masjid to pray, you don't allow him for years. Last 6 years, he's not been allowed to go. I mean, one person cannot make any difference, and he's not going to, if he makes some statement inciting violence or something, you can put him behind bars. But even if you don't allow him to go to prayer, then where is the show of democracy that you are saying?
Now, in the case of Delhi, which, as you know, is also a union territory, the Supreme Court has ruled that civil servants must be accountable to the elected administration. But in the case of Jammu and Kashmir, the Lieutenant Governor has rejected Omar Abdullah's suggestion that his government is consulted on the appointment of civil servants. In your eyes, does the Lieutenant Governor's attitude amount to defiance of the Supreme Court's opinion?
See, it's not been tested in Delhi. Now, of course, I expect that with the BJP government in power, you will not find that sort of, because I'm sure they will not want to make a public display of, and they will find the necessary compromises which are there, which should have been in a democracy. See, you will not get any chief minister or the central government, say in the case of Delhi, agreeing 100%. You will have some differences, but then you sit down and discuss, and you find compromises. And that is how it is being done.
Absolutely. But in the case of Delhi, the Supreme Court specifically ruled that civil servants must be accountable to elected administrators, i.e., to the elected government. But in the case of Jammu and Kashmir, the Lieutenant Governor refuses to consult the Chief Minister, even on something as simple as the appointment of civil servants. In his attitude and in his refusal, is he not defying the Supreme Court's opinion?
See, in Delhi, I'm not so sure whether what is the correct position, because after the Supreme Court judgment, they brought in a separate legislation overruling the Supreme Court judgment, which said that the Lieutenant Governor will have the full powers, even over the officials.
But that was specifically with regard to Delhi.
It's because of Delhi. So, again, you have that same power. But I still fail to understand why the Lieutenant Governor cannot consult, even in a situation where the power is with him. After all, he has to get things done through the elected Chief Minister and the department. So, if a minister doesn't have a secretary who he trusts and who he can believe in, you will find that there's going to be a problem. You can't have him reporting to a different boss and therefore looking over his shoulder to see whether I'm doing correctly, or everything that the minister says that I have to report to the governor and take his okay also.
But that is precisely the situation that prevails in Jammu and Kashmir.
Yeah, that is why you have problems. And
I mean, the chief minister should be the head of the government and the head of the bureaucracy, but the chief secretary and the secretaries probably consider the governor their boss, not Omar Abdullah.
That's true. And that is not correct.
And that is not correct. Okay.
Hi, I'm Karan Thapar. Over the last few years, I hope you've been watching my program, The Interview on the Wire. During that period, I've interviewed doctors, politicians, businessmen, scientists, authors, and even the occasional Nobel laureate. For me, it's been exciting. I hope it's been enjoyable for you. But these, as you know, are tough times, and if this program is going to remain bold, independent, and sometimes even defiant, then I think we need your support. At the end of the day, it's a truism, but editorial independence is best defended by the viewers. So if you would like this program to remain the way it is, forthright, outspoken, and interesting, then would you consider supporting us? All you have to do is to click on the description at the bottom. But more than anything else, I hope you will continue to watch the interview. Your viewership means an awful lot to me.
Let's look at this matter a little differently, Mr. Pillai. It's 20 months since the Supreme Court orally said that statehood should be restored as soon as possible, but that simply hasn't happened. Yet the Supreme Court seems to have forgotten all about it in those 20 months. If the court meant what it said, shouldn't it have taken this matter further on its own? After all, 20 months is a long time to explain that phrase as soon as possible.
Yeah, I agree. And that is why in the opening comments I made, there has been an abdication of duties of the Supreme Court. A constitution bench of the Supreme Court, your file petitioners, apart from me, many other petitioners have filed petitions saying that the action of abolishing the state is unconstitutional and a legal argument. I mean, we are not looking at the pure legal argument, constitutional. And this is a constitution bench. It is duty bound to give a yes or a no. It can't say, I'm not considering the situation because the central government is saying that we will restore statehood at some future date. I think if that is so, then every case which comes on which you are challenging the constitutional validity of a government action, if the government says, okay, I will reverse it in due course, then the Supreme Court has no duty, no job at all.
You're making a very serious charge against the Supreme Court. Your words, which you said just now and you repeated in your answer to the first question, was that there has been an abdication of its duties by the Supreme Court. You're actually saying the Supreme Court has failed to do what it's meant to do, which is justice and right.
Supreme Court is meant to uphold the Constitution. And therefore, when people challenge any action of the government, the Supreme Court could well say, I still say it is perfectly constitutional for the government, central government, to abolish a state. Fine, they could say it. And then the issue would stop completely till the further decision taken. Then you and I wouldn't be having this argument because we might be arguing over whether it's correct or not and whether it should be reviewed and maybe after review also. But the Supreme Court has to take a decision. It has to say yes or no. Is it constitutional or is it not constitutional? If it's unconstitutional, it has to be struck down.
And what the Supreme Court did was to take no position whatsoever.
Take no position. And therefore, you are, from our point of view, you are allowing an unconstitutional act to continue for the last 6 years.
Which is why I say, at a time when the Supreme Court was being looked to for justice and for the right course of action, the Supreme Court failed the country.
Yes, I think specifically in this particular case, I think the Supreme Court failed in its duties. It failed to uphold its constitution, which it is expected to protect.
Okay, I'm just repeating that because I think it's very important. In this case, the Supreme Court failed in its duties. It failed to uphold the Constitution, which is what it is there to do.
Yes, I have no doubt about that.
Now, the elections of September 2024 were, of course, a great moment of hope for Jammu and Kashmir. People turned out in unprecedented numbers to vote. If after that the Modi government refuses to grant full statehood, what impact will that have on the Kashmiri people? Secondly, on the way they view the central government. And thirdly, on the way they view their link with the rest of India.
See, I think the issue of Jammu and Kashmir being an integral part of India is that debate is over, long over. Because even when the Article 370 or even all had said J&K is an integral part of India, that issue is out. Now, if you say that they are part of India, then you should give them, I think, the people the same amount of respect that you give to the people in other parts of the country. You had peaceful elections. You had a relatively peaceful situation over the last few years. Occasional incidents are always there in every state. You will find that something taking place in Chhattisgarh. You will find something take place in Manipur. You'll find something taking place in other areas. But you have to trust the state government. The state government, I think the chief minister did in the first few months. He's now, I think, turning a little bitter, but he's been supportive of the state government. When the Pahalgam terror incident took place, I think it was a great opportunity lost because you had the first time you had people in Jammu and Kashmir. They are holding candlelight vigils. They are condemning the thing. They are coming out in support of the government. They are condemning the terrorists in public. And we lost, I think the central government lost a great opportunity in capitalizing on that.
Now, in your petition to MPs, you have also asked for an amendment to the Constitution that guarantees that in future no existing state can be demoted to union territory. How likely is it that MPs will also support that?
See, most members of parliament come from the states. It has been a long-standing demand of many states saying that bifurcation of states itself should have the concurrence of the state legislature. You can't just consult them. Today, you need only to consult them first, but then you can make a state into two states, or you can make a state into a state and a union territory. Look at the issue of Manipur, which is the whole issue is again territorial integrity of Manipur. The Meiteis are always worried about that some group or the other is trying to break up the state. If you were able to bring a constitutional amendment saying that you can't abolish a state or change the state's boundaries without the concurrence of the state legislature, I think you will get almost unanimous approval from all the state governments, and MPs who come from the states will find it very difficult to oppose this. So the Modi government should not have any worry that such an act of amending the constitution, Article 2, to say that no state can be without the concurrence of the state legislature, will get almost unanimous approval.
Finally, before August 2019, Ladakh was also a part of Jammu and Kashmir. Now it's a union territory on its own. What is your stand on Ladakh?
See, Ladakh, union territory with a legislative assembly which is fully empowered. Today, they don't have that. Again, like in J&K, the Lieutenant Governor has all the powers. So, which is why they are asking for the sixth schedule status and so on and so forth. Whereas I to an extent, I think sixth schedule, some people have asked for it, but there is no harm even if Ladakh is given statehood with full powers.
But you're not demanding the reunification of Ladakh with Jammu and Kashmir.
That I think is, at least to an extent, I think that is almost now a fait accompli. It is that separation is now a fait accompli. It's been there. The demand for a union territory has been there even for the last 20, 25 years. It has always been considered, but I think in one sense, at least I think it's good that they have a separate administration.
But you would support a Ladakhi demand for full statehood. That was apparent in your last answer.
Yes.
Mr. Pillai, thank you very much for the time you've given me. And thank you in particular for making crystal clear your attitude to the way the Supreme Court has handled the issue of statehood for Jammu and Kashmir. As you put it, the Supreme Court has failed in its duties. It's failed to uphold the Constitution, which is what it's there to do. Take care. Stay safe.
Thank you.
Hi, I'm Karan Thapar. Over the last few years, I hope you've been watching my program, The Interview on the Wire. During that period, I've interviewed doctors, politicians, businessmen, scientists, authors, and even the occasional Nobel laureate. For me, it's been exciting. I hope it's been enjoyable for you. But these, as you know, are tough times, and if this program is going to remain bold, independent, and sometimes even defiant, then I think we need your support. At the end of the day, it's a truism, but editorial independence is best defended by the viewers. So if you would like this program to remain the way it is, forthright, outspoken, and interesting, then would you consider supporting us? All you have to do is to click on the description at the bottom. But more than anything else, I hope you will continue to watch The Interview. Your viewership means an awful lot to me.